cyclocross bike versus gravel bike, a debate for the ages, like Apple versus Android or jam versus cream first on your scone, naturally. Now, in this case, both of these bikes, as you can see, are drop handlebar bikes. They've evolved from road bikes to be able to ride off-road. But are they essentially the same thing? And if there are any differences, what are they? And does anybody care? Well, yes, they do. If you already own one of these, you might want to see if it's worth swapping to the other one. If you're looking at buying one in the first instance, you want to know which one is right for you. And even if neither of those things are the case, damn it, we just want to know. To find out, not only do I have Trek's World Cup winning Boom cyclocross bike and their incredibly sexy looking Checkpoint gravel bike, I've also brought them both to a cyclocross course. I'm going to ride them back to back and see if we can't explain the difference in the real world. Now, by bringing them to the natural habitat of the cross bike, will we finally see a gravel bike out of its comfort zone, or will the ultimate do-it-all bike do this too? To start with, I'm going to do a hot lap on the Boom cyclocross bike. Thinks he's Sven Nys, that lad, doesn't he? Now, whilst I'm redlining a hot lap, I thought we'd start to unravel the mystery by going back into the mists of time. The origins of cyclocross can apparently be traced back to 1902, when road bikes weren't really a thing, but neither was tarmac, although that was coincidentally invented in the same year. Now, while people have ridden bikes off-road since forever, cyclocross is a racing discipline, and the fastest machines for the job were lightly modified road bikes. Over the years, though, technology moved them forwards. Smaller gears you could pedal at less than 10 miles per hour being one, bigger, wider, grippier tyres, and greater mud clearance being another. The bikes evolved to be optimised for tight, twisty riding through muddy fields or muddy woodland, or both. Away from racing though, people began to recognise the versatility of this type of bike. I mean, until the advent of disc brakes, these were the only lightweight drop handlebar bikes that you could fit wider tyres to. And so bike brands spotted a bit of a trend, and in some cases they would build bikes that would allow you to fit mudguards and pannier racks, and so many cross bikes became trusted workhorses. And I think that is the main source of the confusion, because for many people a cyclocross bike was, and still is, the ultimate do-it-all bike. At its heart though, a cyclocross bike is a bike for racing. It's responsive, it's agile, it wants to go fast in the dirt. The boon itself was used to devastating effect by Belgian legend Sven Nys. It continues to be by many of the world's best, like Lucinda Brand. That said, you don't need to race or indeed ride fast to enjoy one. It's perfectly at home cruising on roads and trails, but it is at its best in tight, twisty stuff. And also worth bearing in mind, if you stick to the UCI rules and limit yourself to 33mm wide tyres, they don't really like rocks. You'd be hard pushed to explain to someone why riding around a flat field is really good fun, but man alive, that is really good fun. So what then about the gravel bike? 3, 2, 1, go! Yeah! Thinks he's Kel Ryan in that lad, just without the mullet, the tash, and the talent. Now, if you have been paying attention to GCN, then you'll already know the story of gravel, but I will tell it for you again briefly anyway. Back in about 2008, a new form of racing was crystallising in the US Midwest. Far away from tight corners, soft mud and trees, these gravel grinders were about big miles, rough gravel roads and loose corners, which were few and far between. Various bikes were used, plenty of cyclocross bikes as you'd imagine, but racers modified them to fit ever wider tyres for increased comfort and increased control. Then, when bikes were made specifically for these events, those two factors were paramount. How could the bike be more comfortable for big miles and yet also go faster when it counted through loose corners? Also, riders needed to be able to carry loads of stuff for these monster self-supported epics as opposed to just an hour round an urban park. What you see before you here today then is the ultimate embodiment of that. For a start, it's covered in bosses, so you can carry gazillions of things all over the forks, on the frame, even in the frame. Then you can fit 45mm wide tyres in this, and that's with acres of mud clearance as well. And actually, if you ran slightly smaller diameter 650B wheels, you could fit even fatter tyres than that. And there's no UCI to stop you doing it. It's also got a wider range of gears for inching up steep climbs when heavily laden with luggage, whereas on a cyclocross bike, you don't need that, because if you're faster getting off and running, you get off and run. That said, swapping out gear ratios is a simple task. On paper, it shouldn't dive around tight corners quite as quickly, but can I tell the difference? Whereas a cyclocross bike is designed for sharp, explosive efforts and diving in and out of corners, a gravel bike has been designed for slightly more steady state riding. But that said, gravel has evolved. It's not just about big open roads in the Midwest anymore. It's now a byword from anything from tarmac to single track and anything in between. On this particular bike, comfort is turned up to 11 as well, with the addition of Trek's ISO speed decouplers at the seat tube junction and also at the head tube. And they dramatically increase the compliance of the frame. And actually, it has to be said, the Boon also features ISO speed decouplers, and that's because you get a double whammy with increased compliance, comfort, but also speed as well. And then lastly, the difference is in the geometry, so how the bike feels to ride. The origin of the bike, the bottom bracket down here, around which all of your measurements are based, is lower to improve your stability by lowering your centre of gravity. Now, it's only 8mm lower compared to the Boon, but that's significant. The bike is also longer to make it more stable at higher speeds, particularly when it gets fast and loose. But to counteract that increased length, Trek spec a slightly shorter stem, so that keeps your position on the bike the same, but it also makes sure the handling is still nice and agile. It's not too stable, so it's still fun.
Right, wow, that was equally cool. I definitely noticed that lower bottom bracket height. Like, I hit my pedal a few times, like not badly, just kind of kissed it against the dirt, enough that I was like, oh, hello. But with the tyres maybe not being quite so grippy, couldn't lean it too far in anyway. I think I'm going to need a bit of time to process that one actually.
Right, more work is needed. It's clear that whilst we're comparing two different types of bike here, what's not helpful in this comparison are the tyres. 32mm wide cyclocross specific tyres versus 40mm wide file tread gravel tyres that are designed for completely different conditions. And it's not just the grip as well, size matters. as you know. This boon has been designed around 33mm wide cyclocross tyres because that's the UCI legal limit. Whereas when you take it away from the cyclocross course, as we know, wider tyres can roll smoother, particularly over bumpy terrain. And the bumpier and the gnarlier it gets with rocks and roots, the more important width matters. And that, I think, principally is one of the biggest differences between the two types of bikes. Of course, there is nothing stopping you fitting wider tyres to a cyclocross bike. Trek say that the boon will accept up to 38mm wide tyres, and that's being really safety conscious, as you want your bike manufacturer to be. Whilst you can't get close to what you can fit in a checkpoint, you can get close to that magic 40mm wide, which is the point at which, well, a bike can pretty much do anything. What's also important to note is that you can, of course, fit narrower tyres to a gravel bike like a checkpoint. You can fit road tyres in there, and you can fit cyclocross tyres too. You will need to be careful about that bottom bracket height, not on the road so much, but certainly on a tight, twisty cyclocross course. But I am very, very interested to know what will happen if I stick cross tyres on that. Will I effectively turn a gravel bike into a cyclocross bike simply by putting cyclocross tyres on? Is that effectively what this all boils down to? One more hot lap needed.
Here we go! Maybe push that one a little bit hard. Lost the front end going around a particularly fast corner. But otherwise, actually, hold that thought. We need some times, don't we? Let's get some times.
So the results from our deeply unscientific test: the Trek Boon Cyclo-Cross comes in first place with 6 minutes 25 seconds. The Checkpoint gravel bike, 6 minutes 31, so 6 seconds slower. Now, is that just 6 seconds slower or 6 seconds slower? I mean, it's up to you. 6 seconds per lap will add up to perhaps nearly a minute over the course of a race, which would require a fair bit of extra power to make up. But then that also might not be relevant to you at all. And what about the Checkpoint with cyclocross tyres on? Well, I lost 14 seconds falling off and then dusting myself off, but after that my time tracked fairly closely to the Checkpoint. So perhaps the larger size of those file tread tyres actually made up for the less aggressive tread. So, as you can tell, we have conclusively proved that a cyclocross bike is better suited to cyclocross courses, which seems like a day well spent. But no, there is definitely more to it than that. It's been super interesting riding these two bikes back to back. Firstly, it's got to be said, both bikes are a lot of fun. Like, they're awesome. And I've just been riding around a muddy field and it's been brilliant. Secondly, the differences between them here on the cross course are relatively subtle, at least in these dry conditions. So when assessing the two bikes objectively, the practical differences between them have to be factored in as well. A gravel bike tends to be able to carry more stuff. This one certainly can, both on the bike and in the bike. And the wider tyres allow you to take it virtually anywhere. And could even be faster on some cyclocross courses anyway, as long as you're not bound by those UCI racing regulations. Now, it doesn't mean that the cyclocross bike is stuck on a cyclocross course. Trek themselves say that the Boon and also the aluminium crocket can be used for and are used for road and all-road gravel riding as well. But its raison d'etre is cyclocross. They've taken a no-compromise approach to designing the ultimate cyclocross bike. And so it does mean that there are compromises elsewhere, like tyre clearance and storage and the fact that the geometry is honed for tight, twisty, muddy terrain, as we can see. Now, actually, the bottom bracket height was more noticeable than I thought. Ultimately, the inherent differences between the bikes that can't be changed or swapped out, like gear ratios, comes down to tyre clearance and frame geometry. And those are potentially subtle differences, meaning that both bikes continue to be super versatile. But tyre clearance and frame geometry are also the main differences between a road bike and a gravel bike too, so don't underestimate the effect they can have. However, don't write off the cyclocross bike just yet. I mean, I don't want to ruin my conclusion but I will anyway. Certainly the type of riding that I do is not endless gravel roads and 200-mile epics. My off-road drop handlebar riding is woods and fields and mud, and actually the attributes of a cyclocross bike are perfect for that. There is absolutely still a place for a cyclocross bike, and I've got to say I applaud Trek for continuing to invest not just in the bikes but also the sport as a whole. Which bike should you buy though? Well, the gravel bike is definitely a more versatile bike with its ability to run wider tyres and the storage and the handling that perhaps might suit more people more of the time, unless you race cyclocross or you're like me, in which case there is definitely life in the old dog yet. Let me know what you think in the comments section though. I'll be fascinated to hear your thoughts. Are you a cyclocross traditionalist? Do you have a gravel bike? Do you still believe that there's no difference between the two? Get involved in the comments down below. And thank you very much to Trek for lending me 2 of your rather lovely bikes today.